I'm just going to say it. I don't like EufyMake. But I don't mean the machine, I mean the name, Eufy. It sounds silly, and it also makes me think of the Final Fantasy character, who also happens to share a name with my last surviving dog. So yeah, emotional baggage before I've even switched it on. And yes, later in this video she'll be helping with some tests we do. Not my dog, the character. We'll get onto that. The printer itself though, this is the new EufyMake. Yeah, the same team behind the M5 and the M5C. Two machines I personally love, not for crazy specs or reliability, but because when they were released, they were smart, user-focused, and the whole idea was they just worked. Honestly, they could have dominated the FDM space if it wasn't for a particular other brand doing it better, and Anker losing steam on development. But this isn't about the name change or the nostalgia. This thing just pulled in $46 million on Kickstarter, and it is a resin printer. It is. And after all the hype videos you've seen, you're about to hear from someone who's not here to kiss its ass. So hi, I'm Ross, and this is Fohammer Videos. Now, first up, I have to thank Sam Prentice for this review existing. He's the guy who put me back in touch with EufyMake, so please check out his channel too. Right, we're going to blitz through the boring review checklist and get straight onto the good stuff, because I've pushed this thing hard in ways I don't think the marketing team ever pictured, and the results range from that's genius to, oh, that's a choice. Now, I've tested it in 2D, in 3D, and in the kind of awkward space between where you're not sure if you're printing a picture or a lawsuit. And along the way, I've found features I love and limitations you'll definitely want to know about before you drop your money, because it's a lot of money to drop. Now, make no mistake, this is a resin printer, which is my home turf. Now, the industry calls it UV ink, but really it's coloured resin. And this works by, well, instead of a 2D printer spraying ink that dries in the air, this drops resin and cures it almost instantly with a UV lamp in the print head. That means it can print on almost any surface and even build up physical height too in layers, which makes it a 3D printer. Kind of. So let's talk about user experience. If you've never used the M5 printers, one of the reasons I rated them so highly, because at the time they were released, they didn't feel like your usual lump of semi-industrial machinery that had accidentally wandered into your living room. They felt like a proper consumer product from the unboxing. EufyMake, just like EufyMake before it, has absolutely nailed that same premium vibe. Even the packaging, it's clean, everything feels deliberate, and even the way you crack it open has that you've bought something fancy energy. You undo the Velcro straps, lift off the lid, and it all just presents itself like it's worth your attention. And before you start typing, why is he reviewing the bloody box? Well, think about it. First impressions matter. You don't show up to a first date smelling like burnt toast. And based on how well this thing's done already, yeah, I'll happily put out on the first date. Everything's clearly labelled, walking you through each step of setup before pointing you to install the software on your phone or computer, and either option works perfectly fine with this machine. Visually, it's very much aimed at the consumer market, sharing far more in common with 2D printers than something with a hulking resin vat. It's got dual fold-down doors on the front and back that hold closed with magnets, and you can just unclip these and remove them easily if you need to. Just a note that despite the physical dimensions of the unit listed online, running it with the large standard bed installed means the forward and back motion needs about 73 centimeters of full bench depth just to operate, and that's about the same as when it's got the doors folded down. There's only two ports, power and Ethernet, on the bottom left side, and it also has built-in Wi-Fi which stayed stable for the entire time I was testing. But the power on and off routine is a little odd. When you plug it in, you need to wait for the light to turn green. Then you hold this button for a few seconds so it can boot up and run its self-tests. But the startup chime it plays is surprisingly cheerful. This is the sort of sound that makes you feel like the printer is actually pleased to see you. Powering down the machine is the reverse. You've got to hold the button for several seconds until you hear the shutdown audio, but then you've got to wait about 15 minutes while it completes a full power down cycle and the button turns red. And that process is intentional because it clears the lines of any residual UV ink so it doesn't harden inside whilst the machine's sat dormant. If you leave it switched on but unused, you'll actually hear it run a short cycle roughly every 20 minutes or so, and that's to keep everything fresh for exactly the same reason. It's only got one button, this is on top, send a job remotely, press this, the print starts, whilst it's printing, hold this, the print stops. Well, pauses. There are 6 inks which tidily click-clack into place: cyan, magenta, yellow, and key. That's black. Plus, it's got white and gloss. White here is for when your material isn't already white, like paper. Now, you might need anywhere from none to several layers depending on the surface you're printing on. Now, don't worry, the software sets this automatically when you pick a material type. And having gloss is fine, but the standard inks are already pretty shiny anyway, so personally, I'd rather have seen a matte option. But EufyMake have already confirmed they are working on more materials for the future, and that is super exciting. If you can already imagine the possibilities, or you've got an idea of what you would want to see, comment below. There's also this cleaning cartridge on the right side. This is hidden behind a vanity plate, and this flushes the lines with detergent, and it actually stores purged resin, because UV ink is still resin, which means it's hazardous, so wear gloves when doing any maintenance, and dispose of it properly. And be aware it gives off VOCs. It has got a built-in carbon filter in the front, but this only really helps when you've got the doors closed using the small plate, and even then it only reduces fumes, it doesn't remove them. I'm going to be covering general resin safety in an upcoming video, so click subscribe and keep your eye out for that. But yeah, this comes with 2 print beds. The mini bed installed by default has an area of 333 by 88 millimeters, and the larger standard bed also in the box swaps it easily. Just unlock the latch, drop it in, and the power and data connect through the extrusion underneath. Whatever bed or accessory you fit, the E1 tells the studio software automatically. But this larger bed is listed at 330 by 420 millimeters online. In truth though, the software confirms it's actually 333 by 418, only slightly smaller than A3 in depth, or height. Depends how you're holding the paper. Now, the height clearance from the bed to the actual print head is about 150 millimeters, but in reality, anything that's over about 60 to 70 millimeters tall triggers a snapshot failed error and you can't print, so that's your object's height limit. And as for the height of prints themselves, the maximum height of a printed image is 5 millimeters from a surface, which we're going to dig into later in the print tests. What is super handy and cool is that before every job, these dual lasers actually scan your material to keep the print head at the right distance, or at least 2 or 3 millimeters from the top surface. Again, there's more to cover about that, especially when we look at materials that have got texture or variable depth. We'll come on to that later. Now, it's also got a built-in camera for bed previews, much like a lot of modern laser engravers. Now, it works well, giving you a clear photo of the bed so you can line up designs, and on the larger plate it shoots in sections and then stitches them together, which keeps the center more accurate than if it was trying to take a wide angle photo of the whole thing. But with that in mind, the further you go width-wise, the more distortion creeps in, and that's just the reality of a fixed camera. Personally, I'd love to see it mounted in the print head on a future model so it can take perfect top-down shots anywhere across the plate. Now, this is where I'd normally talk about the UI, but this doesn't have an onboard screen, just like their M5C. Everything's controlled remotely through the phone, tablet, or computer app. Setup's quick, connect to the printer's hotspot, give it your Wi-Fi details, and you're in. The interface is the same across all devices, and there's also a web version too, and even a fully offline mode for those who like to keep their printers air-gapped from society. Unlike many modern Maker apps, this one opens to EufyMake's Make It Real platform, their design storefront. Now, it's already got hundreds of curated files, with more coming as more people get hands-on, because after every print, they give you the option to upload and share your designs if you're feeling generous with the community, which is exactly what I did with this great Gyarados over Kanagawa design that I did. I'll put a link in the description. But I've got to say, even for beta software, this is impressive. Now, sure, there are some small bugs and some missing nice to haves right now, but in the 3D printer world I've existed in for a few years, I have genuinely seen final release software in far worse shape than this. And here, the EufyMake team are actively listening to and talking with the beta testers, which is a promising sign, though we do have to keep in mind that their track record under the AnchorMake name wasn't exactly lightning fast on updates. So maybe that's why they changed it. I honestly think we'd be in the same place if they just kept that better name and delivered these results. But yeah, from a usability point of view, this is built for your workflow. It's intuitive, simple, and it gets out of your way so you can just make things. And here's how it works in general practice. Place your object on the plate, take a snapshot, drop your image where you want it, hit print. But there are some variables such as selecting your material type that makes changes, such as setting the default number of layers for color and adhesion. For example, printing on 3D printed plastic plates, as I did, defaults to 5 white layers and 1 CMYK. Pick another material and those numbers adjust automatically. Or, as you start to learn it, you can set these layer counts yourself, probably with the idea of saving ink in mind. If you're printing on something white, you don't need any white layers before CMYK because it's already white. Now, before we dive into showing these print tests, I've stripped out my usual sexy color grading so you're seeing colors as close to reality as possible. And I've used a Calibrite color checker video to grade this following footage, so what you see here should be close to real and accurate enough for anyone who wants to geek out over color. Feel free to pause and take screenshots. Now, first up is this Northlight Images test chart, which I used years ago to test my 2D printer because there were guides available for it online on YouTube. This thing covers everything: gradients, detail, solid colors, grayscale, variable colors in one shot. It's the sort of reference pros would use to check how well a printer can handle tricky transitions and fine detail. I'm going to put a link to the source of this in the description, which will explain what all of these images are actually showing and what we're testing. But next, I made my own custom test card, and this one focuses on line width, text sharpness, gradients, and a simple color chart. Again, pause if you want to take a closer look, but it's the easiest way to see exactly what this printer can resolve in terms of resolution and accuracy. Now on that, the E1 claims a resolution of 1440 dpi, and that works out to about an 18 micron dot, roughly the same as a 12 to 14K resin printer's pixel size. But just like resin printers, theoretical resolution isn't the same as practical. It can't perfectly do a checkerboard of 1 dot on, 1 dot off at this scale. I actually had to grab a microscope to verify this. But what we need to consider is the way this printhead expresses ink is a few millimeters above the surface of a print, so these tiny droplets will spread a bit as they travel through the air. That said though, from a normal viewing distance, the detail and color rendering you get from prints on this still looks fantastic. But yeah, for any 2D image pros out there, this runs on a custom CMYK profile, not a standard one, and you can't edit the ICCs. Now, for profile tests, here's almost Eufy from Final Fantasy to help us out, and I UV printed her on 3D printed PLA boards in various combinations of CMYK, white and gloss, and these show not just the available ink modes, but how changing the order, adding or omitting layers can completely alter the final look. Along the bottom, you'll see the different quality settings available: 720 by 720 for draft, 720 by 1440 for standard, and 1440 by 1440 for high quality. And yeah, it's clear that these improve in sharpness as you increase the resolution. And going back to those layer combinations with the different orders, printing on transparent materials is where CMYK first, then white really shines. Literally. Without the white, the print's actually translucent. If you add the white, it now pops. And you can also add another CMYK layer on top of that to make it double-sided. And that'd be perfect for things like signage or window graphics. Now, not everything's perfect, there are still some quirks. You might even notice there's some scratches on this print, but we'll come back to those shortly. The thing that really sticks out is this faint white halo around the images. Now, EufyMake are working currently on a white underbase choke setting to fix this, and that will reduce how wide the white layer is below it, but right now as I'm testing, this is still in beta. And the E1 can also print in raised textures, as I mentioned. There's 3 main modes and I've done them all, but here I'm going to show the default values in terms of height and the maximums. So flat is standard. Flat raised can actually lift the whole image up to a maximum of 3mm, but the image stays flat. Pattern texture basically treats dark areas as low and bright areas as high, up to a maximum of 2mm in print height, and this can also print in gloss only mode for if you only want to add the texture. Now, relief texture is the clever one. This uses machine learning. I'm not calling it AI because that's not what it is, but this tries to build more of a natural raised surface. And this is one of several machine learning tools built into the software. This, along with editing your own images, can cost 1 to 2 credits, and at the point of recording, anybody who has one of these gets 200 free credits a month. You can buy more. But yeah, as for relief texture, I tested it at the default 2.3mm with smoothing set to 1, then the same again with smoothing set to 7, and then I completely maxed it out at 5mm. And yeah, you don't need to add the texture on this printer because this will print on pre-textured objects too. For example, I printed directly onto some Warhammer scenery by photographing it on the E1, adding the textures in Photoshop, and then sending that back to the E1 to print it. And yeah, I'll admit, the results here look awful because I picked terrible colours and textures, but I just wanted to get it done quick to prove that this concept works. However, there are some printing height limits to be aware of though. For example, on this 35mm half sphere, it could only print accurately down to about the halfway point. So I then made a test ramp with 1mm steps, and this showed, well, the print quality is pretty spot on up to about a 3mm depth change, and still fairly decent up to 5mm, but it starts breaking down steadily on its way up to around 10 or 11mm, and is completely blown out afterwards. But still, I'd say that's a pretty solid range in terms of print depth. But one tip here is never mix objects of different heights on the same job, because the E1 will only focus on the tallest object it sees and print everything else as if it's at that same height. Right then, the not fun bit. Let's talk pricing. Now we know this is an expensive machine, and the inks aren't exactly pocket change either. EufyMake's ink runs at 50 cents per milliliter, and that's best case scenario assuming you use every last drop in a cartridge on prints. So yeah, the consumables do put the fee in Eufy. Yeah, even I heard how terrible that was. Let's move on. So, what do the prices actually mean in the real world? Well, here's a few of my test prints as examples. This Gyarados print, done in high quality, estimated to use about 0.24 milliliters, and that was with 6 layers of white. So we're talking somewhere around 12 to 19 cents for this print. But all of these raised Eufy profile tests on PLA plastic used 30.34 milliliters of ink, which is $15 to $25 just for this test sheet. So I've got to be honest, it's a good job I'm not, personally, a big fan of raised prints. I'd probably be more inclined to create a separate 3D printer to create depth or texture because the cost of filament or resin is going to be far cheaper than this ink. Now another example, this small page of stickers was just 0.13 milliliters, so that makes it less than 10 cents. And my biggest print, this huge Midgar poster printed on a metal plate, completely dissimilar to any other brands out there who may print on metal plates, came in at 0.41 milliliters, so we're looking 20 to 32 cents to print it. Again, this had 6 layers of white. So yeah, it's not as cheap as our typical office printer, but it's still far less than I expected when we're not adding height to it. And yeah, I would also love for this to be cheaper, but it isn't. Right. About those scratches. So, one consumable that I don't see gets talked about much is the print bed. Not the rigid plastic base, but the top sheet. This has got a peel away white cover, and underneath is a gummy, rubbery layer that grips onto whatever you're printing on. Now, with my thin PLA plates, the curing ink sometimes actually made them contract and curl up and pull away from that sticky base, which meant the print head started scraping across them mid-print. Now, EufyMake already has a flexible version of the white ink that will help with this sort of thing when you're printing on more flexible materials. And as I said, they've hinted at even more material options coming too. But over time, especially if you do print off the edge of a material, which I've done both by accident and on purpose to make sure I get full edge to edge, you'll end up with ink baked onto the bed. Now, you can scrape it off, but the sheet will eventually lose its stick, which for me took about a week because of all the tests I did and my lack of caring. In the real world, you'd slow that down with better care, or even 3D print some jigs for batch jobs just to keep the surface safe and clean. In desperation, I actually broke out the old FDM survival kit, which included glue stick and hairspray. Just remember, I did print a lot during testing and tried to push it to breaking point. I wasn't gentle. You can get replacements for these, and from what EufyMake told me, they're expected to be under $10 a sheet. So at least it's not the biggest wallet killer when you inevitably ruin one. Now, before we wrap up, I've got to show you 2 accessories I tested with this. First, the Rotary tool. Honestly, this is one of the best Rotary tools I have ever used. It attaches just like a print bed, it locks in place, and holds pretty much any cylindrical object, including cups with handles. And the E1's built-in lasers can even help to tilt the object to handle tapered edges, which is incredibly cool. But right now, this isn't perfect. For example, I printed my son a Fortnite bottle, and I did another bottle for my mate who runs a local gymnastics club. But the E1 often misread the diameter. You can set it manually in the software, but then when you go to print, the auto measurement currently forces you to override your settings, which left me with overlapping designs instead of a more perfect wrap. And unlike when you use the flatbeds, there's currently no way to use the camera function, so you can't pinpoint exactly where a design will start, either in height or rotation. So this does currently lead to quite a bit of guesswork. Don't get me wrong, a lot of this is still great, but in comparison to how much of the rest of the EufyMake system works so incredibly well, this area does still need some work to make it seamless as the rest of the machine's functions. And the second thing is sticker sheets. There's not really much to say here. This is super easy. You literally just print your sticker design down onto these sheets and then run them one at a time through EufyMake's laminator. And that's it. Ultra durable stickers, really easy. And I've actually used them to come up with some new faux hammer branding tests, so please let me know if you've got any favorites in the comments. Now, before I conclude, I really want to just hammer home how easy this machine is to use. So here's the first thing I ever printed on it. No test runs, no calibration. This was just an idea I had that I wanted to desperately apply as soon as I knew the machine existed. And I had no idea if this would even work, but going from idea to this being my first immediately working print shows just how easy this was. And it was as simple as I grabbed some random terrain textures from the internet, cropped them into circles, ran them through the depth map tool in EufyMake Studio, and printed them straight onto Warhammer bases. And it worked. First try. I now have coloured and textured Warhammer bases ready to go with incredibly little effort. It worked. First try. That's how easy the E1 is to learn how to use. So here's where I land on it. It's brilliant. It's not perfect, but it is unmistakably brilliant, and that's worth underlining because we're only at the start of this tech being something we can actually have in our homes. What's here is already powerful, easy, and wildly fun to use, and the potential is huge. Like, imagine they swapped out that gloss material for a soluble support material and then opened the door to printing actual full color 3D models straight out of the machine, fully cured and ready to handle without cleanup. Yeah, then we'd be looking at something that could completely shake up resin printing entirely, but whether that's just a pipe dream, a patent problem, or just a not yet, I honestly don't know. What I do know is that it's technically possible, and I'm fine dreaming. Even if it wasn't full color, just a soluble support material and the ability to make 3D objects out of this means we'd be able to take stuff off the plate and get rid of 90% of that post-processing that we hate in resin printing. But even with what this is now, I'm blown away. The truth is, EufyMake didn't just make a clever concept, they nailed it in the same way they nailed some big elements of their M5 series. The focus on user experience means you're not learning a new hobby just to use it. You're free to create. Just sit there, think of something. You load it in and the machine actually gets out of your way and the software helps you make the thing you've thought of. But yes, there are still things to keep an eye on. Software polish, ongoing updates, and making sure they don't slip into the slower dev pace that hurt them when they were AnchorMake. But the way they've already been interacting in the beta user Discord server is already miles ahead of how most brands treat paying customers. I've got to be honest with you, this is the most fun I've had with a new piece of tech in a long time. And what I love is that this isn't just another incremental update pretending to be innovation. It's a big swing and it's already connected. So if you came into this video looking to answer the question, should I buy it? Well, if you've made it this far, you probably already know the answer. And let's be fair, you probably already knew that at the start. But if you do buy it and this video was helpful, I would love it if you'd use my affiliate link in the description or pinned comment, because it costs you nothing but it earns me a commission, and that's what helps me keep making videos like this instead of selling my soul to brands who'd rather I just read their press releases. The EufyMake E1 isn't perfect, nothing is, but I've got to be honest, this is probably the closest I've seen any product come, and it's still in beta. I genuinely can't wait to see where this goes from here, and this is a product that is not going to leave my office anytime soon. I love it. I want to say thanks for watching, and a huge thanks goes to our members who are on screen now. They get Discord roles, early access, and exclusive videos. Please consider joining them. That's also a great way to support the channel. We also accept super thanks, and if you want, I'll do one of them buy me a coffee things. But anyway, I want to say until next time, the scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think whether or not they should. And if those scientists are the people at EufyMake, I'm glad they didn't. Keep doing stuff like this. Anyway, until next time, Fohammer out.